some of the musicians were talking to me about of problems they had. And my immediate question is, well, what does your collective bargaining agreement say about this? And they said, well, it says this, but we decided to handle it this way. Because they trust their managers.
Yeah.
But if that ever changes, they can still go back to the other. And that security for musicians, because they know that they're never going to get to run the organization. And God help us if musicians only get to run the organization. They need to have some kind of security behind that. And one of the best ways to do it is to write it. Good fences make good neighbors, and a good contract makes a good relationship. It really does.
You think their contract's a strong one in Nashville?
I think it's a good contract, yeah.
Can you point to others?
That are good contracts? Yeah. It's tough to say because I can't point to any specific issue within a contract that says it's better than another because each individual situation is different.
Comment then on the St. Paul contract.
The St. Paul contract is an experiment in progress. I know that they're trying to move toward having musicians have a greater impact in the organization by having board representation, which I think is absolutely a good thing. Now, you have to start to define the parameters of what's representation. Although people give me crazy looks when I tell them about it, one of the best models that orchestras should be looking at is really the federal government. How a bureaucracy works. I know, it gets laughs. Because a bureaucracy, when it's run well, works marvelously. You know, the post office is a good example. Here's this organization that is required to perform a service. By federal law, they have to do it, but they don't get federal funds to do it, and yet they have to abide by all the federal rules for their employees. It's insane. But they still manage to find a way to get around all of that and make something that works, for better or for worse. And orchestras, I think, need to include musicians in the decision-making process of what goes on. But because of a representative nature, which if you're going to have musicians sitting on a board, personally I feel they need to be representatives, meaning that if you're in a board meeting and you make a decision, an individual musician or two or three cannot make a decision for an entire group without going back first and then having the input that they can put into it. Musicians are very passionate people. And they tend to be very opinionated. The only problem I see with that kind of a situation in St. Paul is it lends a very high degree to having individuals hijack a process for their own personal agenda. There isn't any safeguards put into that. And so, again, if all the players involved on all sides are great and they work well together, you'll have a system that works marvelously. But it will be dependent only on the individuals that work. And when that disappears or evaporates, what are you left with? It becomes a very dangerous situation from that standpoint. I think in St. Paul and in other orchestras that are considering a model like that, they should have musicians on executive board committees. I think that's one of the things that St. Paul does that's spectacular, that every orchestra needs. Not just sitting in the main general board meetings, but the executive board, because that's where the decisions really happen anyway. I don't think musicians should vote, quite frankly. I think they should simply be representatives to put input and to have contact with board members, because from a sheer standpoint of numbers, their vote's worthless. It's like the independents in Congress. You know, they're there, but they have no power. You have to be on either one of the two parties to make it work, and the government's a good example to watch, because you'll see two different parties of ideological differences that are forced to work together. They have no choice. And there's the political intrigue that goes along with that. But in the end, there's still a final product. And the country hasn't fallen apart yet, so at least it works to the degree. I think if orchestras followed that example, and instead of trying to force one side to be completely dominant over another, and realize that between the federal authority granted to the board of directors and the federal authority granted to the musicians via the collective bargaining agreement, those are the two ways that the meeting of the minds has to occur. I think you'll end up with a much longer lasting positive product.
That's terrific. Do you have any questions you would ask me?
That's good. I didn't even think about that one. I would, actually, as someone who runs the Eastman School of Music and a conservatory that has a reputation of producing a large number of professional musicians in this country. What do you think the musicians need to be doing beyond not just what they're doing right now with the artistic training and some of the programs like you have through the IML, but what do they need to be concerned about with the length of their training? Is a 4-year model really worthwhile anymore? Can you fit everything a musician needs to know in 4 years? Or do we need to go to a 5 or 6 year bachelor degree?
Well, first of all, there's not a chance that you can do it in 4 years. And so I think I don't know many young musicians who just do 4 years. They do 6 years. They do a bachelor's and a master's degree. And then beyond, frequently. I think the biggest shift that is evident to us here at Eastman is that young musicians, even in 1990, would enter a music school believing that external systems would take care of them.
I would agree with that.
And that the incredible transformation that's taken place, that took place in just 10 years, so much of it the result of technology.
Right.
And just societal changes, somewhat are the result of technology and some not. That the young musicians now understand, and it's not just at Eastman, but understand that they have to take care of themselves, and that they're independent contractors. It adds a dimension to the orchestral mix, because they'll come out of Eastman, or perhaps one of the other major music schools, with this attitude of individuality, and then join a collective bargaining group where they're expected to essentially play by certain junior rules for a period of time. So it's created a little bit of tension there for some of our recent graduates going into orchestras.
Yeah,
but ultimately, I think very positive.
I'm glad to hear that personally. As a product of a 4-year conservatory myself, I see very much of what you're talking about. There really is too much for a musician to know anymore, and the amount of time it takes to master an instrument from an artistic standpoint is what everyone focuses on now, and that can roughly be done to get someone up and running within 4 years. But there's so much more that needs to be done to really make a musician not just win a job, but then actually want to keep it.
And develop it.
And develop it and move it in a different direction, as opposed to just forcing themselves to be cogs in a wheel. Nobody has to accept that role. They can be much more if they want to be. And learning how to do that is going to be a real critical step in helping the business to take advantage of the level of artistic accomplishment that exists.
One of the most interesting developments, I think, of the last 20 to 25 years is as the competition to win a spot in an ICSOM level orchestra, let's say, has become so high, so incredibly competitive, combined with the development of the star soloist as a commodity. Not that we didn't have star soloists, but now it's a commodity. And incredible fees being paid to the top group. That the training, and I'll say training rather than education, the training of young musicians pre-conservatory or pre-college has been transformed.
Oh, yes.
And so much more attention has been paid to the development of technique and velocity and agility, and less to general musicianship. So that students coming into conservatory